once again we have come to the season of Lent, a time of self-examination and self-preparation for Easter. I know I've told you this from the pulpit before, that when you get to the Lenten season, the readings on the lectionary begin to change. They begin to become a little bit more challenging. They begin to look inside to the deepest recesses of our spirits and seeking to challenge us to become closer to our God and more Christ-like in our behavior. If there's one person that knew a lot about what that was like, it was one of the first disciples that Jesus called, the disciple Peter, known in the Greek as Cephas, on the rock, the stone. And fortunately, we have two letters that from history that are credited to Peter, and both of them are just amazing to read. And I always thought that his insight from spending 3 years with Jesus Christ in the flesh would be very enlightening for all of us. And so on this first Sunday of Lent, I'm sharing with you a passage from his first letter, the first Peter letter. I'm in chapter 3, and I'm reading to you verses 17 through the end of the chapter, verses 22. Let us share together the insights of the Apostle Peter and the teachings of Holy Scripture. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if suffering should be God's will, than to suffer for doing evil. For Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which also he went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison, who in former times did not obey, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah during the building of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were saved through water. And baptism, which this prefigured, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from your body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God with angels and authorities and all powers made subject to him. And God, I God's blessing to the reading of the Word. When I first saw this passage on the lectionary and read it, I thought, okay, this is the church fathers reminding us that the time of Lent is a time to sacrifice, to give up something during this 40-some-odd day journey to Easter, with the idea and hope that after making that pledge and vow to God and to yourself, that after 40 days you will emerge better Christian. But the passage also made me think about what are the things in life that we are willing to sacrifice or suffer for. And that's kind of why I entitled this sermon, Suffering for the Common Good. I'm sure all of you probably either dug out your own driveways this past week or paid someone to shuffle your driveway and get you out of the drive, be able to get out and about in life. But I wondered how many of you maybe went to a neighbor's house and shuffled out their driveway. I know, because I was here 3 times this week shuffling the sidewalk, nobody came to church to shuffle these sidewalks. I did it. And doing it made me think about, would I do this for my mother? Of course, I did. Would I do this for a friend? Possibly, maybe. Would I do it for an enemy? For it is better to suffer for doing good, if suffering should be God's will, than to suffer for doing evil. I think the thing to think about this Lenten season, as we maybe meditate on what we're giving up, what we're tokenly sacrificing for this Lenten season, is to think about the suffering that was endured for each of us. I suppose we don't think of God as suffering, but I think when we cry, God cries. And I do sometimes ponder the kind of things we have put God through in our history of existence because of our disobedience, because of our evil, because of our selfishness and greed and everything else that makes us human. Certainly don't have to go far to think about what Christ suffered. Just pull up Mel Gibson's Passion movie again and try to get through it. The lashing of the whip, the crown of thorns, the walking through the streets and nothing but a loincloth carrying a cross, the nails, the piercing, the hanging, the ultimate suffocation. For each of us. And I ask myself, would we do that for each other? Oh, we might do it for family members. We might do it for our spouse. But would we do that kind of suffering for the common good? I have to say that in asking myself that question, I don't know. I often wonder. I don't see a lot of human beings in the 21st century willing to sacrifice for the better of others. I do see human beings suffering for the betterment of themselves and maybe those who belong to them, like a mother suffers for her kids, or a father who gives of his energies and times and talents and goes to work and makes money for the family. But would we do it for strangers? Would we do it for our enemies? This is what Jesus did for us. All of us. In fact, for Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous suffering for the unrighteous, in order that we may be brought to God. He suffered death in the flesh and was made alive in the Spirit, Peter says. And it was during that time, Peter says, that he also went and made a proclamation to the spirits and in prison and those in former times. In fact, there's a Nicene Creed in the history of the life of the church that says during those 3 days while Christ was in the tomb, that he even went to hell for us. Isn't that amazing to think about? I bring all this up because on Wednesday, Ash Wednesday, I asked the worshipers of our church and of anyone who watches our videos to make a pledge, to give something up, to make a token sacrifice before God and for yourself, in order that you may suffer and know what suffering's all about and understand the suffering our Savior made for us. Having been going through the time of Lent most of my life, I've had times in the Lent season where I didn't fulfill my vow and promise to God. Couldn't suffer that much. Got a little greedy or selfish, and there was other times I was very committed to go through. But even in either of those cases, the kinds of sufferings or sacrificing I was doing was minimal. No way even closely compared to the kind of sacrificing and suffering God and His Son has done for all of us. And yet, this is one of the tenets of the Christian faith. Peter goes on to quote the story of Noah. And during his time, those in former times, as he calls it, who would not obey God. Sometimes wonder if we're not far from the times of Noah again, even though I'm reminded every time I see a rainbow that God promised He would never destroy the world by water again. But imagine the sacrifice Noah made for the good of humanity. I can't help but think, when I think of the Noah story of the Bill Cosby skit that was very famous in the mid-60s. You could probably get it on YouTube or something. I don't know if it's still available. Great skit, great comedy, in which Noah is arguing with God about the building of the ark. You know, God comes to Noah and says, I want you to build an ark. And Noah, according to Bill Cosby, is looking at the heavens going, why? It's not raining. The sun is out. And imagine all the work Noah had to go to build this huge ark. A boat that's bigger than this sanctuary. If you want to see a life-size version of it, there's one in the Cincinnati area. But that's just the beginning of Noah's sacrifice. Because the next direction God gave him was go out and gather 2 of every kind of animal that walks the world. You want to go grab 2 bears? You want to go get a couple hippopotamuses? Not me. Let Noah do that. And imagine trying to get all those critters into his ark. Imagine, as Bill Cosby refers to, the mocking that his neighbors made of him. What you doing, Noah? That's a pretty big thing you're building there. What's going on? Oh, I'm building an ark. Oh, really? Here in this desert? And then, when the rains came, could you imagine what it was like on that ark for 40 days and 40 nights? There was probably a lot of shoveling going on that ark. And there was probably some pretty nasty stuff that was being shoveled. Would you go through that for the common good? And if you follow the story to its end, without Noah's sacrifice, we wouldn't know what a bear is. We wouldn't know what a hippopotamus was, let alone cats and dogs. But because he saved those animals and they would continue to procreate, we have the blessing for someone suffering for our good. It almost seems like a foreign notion in 2021. What? Suffer for someone else? And baptism, which Peter says the Noah story prefigures, now saves us. Not because it removes the dirt from our bodies, but because it is an appeal to God for a good conscience. Tuesday morning I woke up and my wife was very uncomfortable. Let's just say she wasn't real easy to get along with because she was hurting. I looked out the window and saw what I looked like to me at least 12 inches, if not more, of snow. And I thought, well, I got to get some people out. I got to get us out. And after I shoveled my driveway, I went over to Mom and I shoveled hers. And as I was walking back to the house, I knew the house across the street was two elderly people. One who gets around in a wheelchair, the man of the house. And I looked at the car in the driveway and I said, if they want to go anywhere, they're not going to get through their driveway. And while it wasn't a huge driveway, I took the extra, whatever it was, 15 minutes, half hour to shovel. I didn't knock on the door. I didn't let them know who did it. I just thought, they need it. And then I saw the neighbor next door to them, who was also an elderly couple, and I saw a 3-foot drift where the driveway met the road, and I thought, they're not going to get out of their driveway either. And I shoveled that driveway as well, and I didn't tell them, I didn't knock on the door. Just thought, I'll be a good neighbor. Wasn't really too concerned about it. I was actually thankful that this older body could still go out and do that kind of work and not have a heart attack or a stroke. But when I got home, poured myself the other cup of coffee to warm myself back up, I actually had this very neat feeling inside. It was like, yeah, bro, you did something good for somebody. And you didn't do it so you could be recognized and honored and complimented or rewarded in some physical way. You did it just out of the goodness of your heart. And I felt really good about that. A good conscience. And I was glad that Mom could get out and run her activities. Then it was time to come down here. I knew we wanted to be able to get in and out of our building. And that snow just had to go. Had to be moved. And I felt good about that when I got it done. That I had done something good for God's people and for God. Do you have a clear and good conscience? Can you look back on your behaviors and your treatment of each other and of strangers and have a good conscience about how that witnesses to Jesus Christ and how that is a light to others? That's the idea of the Lenten season. Is to do that suffering, that sacrifice, so that you can emerge with a good conscience. So that when Judgment Day comes, you can stand before your Creator boldly and say, God, I did the best I could. And I tried to live Christ with my life. And I tried to show Christ to those that I interacted with, even my enemies. And you can walk away with a good conscience. Our two music guys was telling me the story in Sunday school today about an experience they had in a restaurant bar last night, where a fight started amongst them, and even was directed towards them. where's this going to go? How many fists were thrown, right? But as they told the story, they were just trying to be the peacemakers. And they were able to go home with a good conscience. Because they didn't start a fight, they didn't continue a fight, they ended the fight. With the help of cops, right guys? Oh, you had it taken care of long before the cops got there.
Yeah, we had it.
A good conscience. But the opposite is true too, you know. I've seen people who go through life treating strangers and family members and acquaintances like dirt. And you can tell in their personality, they don't have a good conscience. They're frustrated about it. They're angry about it. They're upset about it. They don't know who to yell at because they certainly don't want to blame themselves. It's what I call the Washington, D.C. syndrome. And too bad, and unfortunately, that syndrome has worked its way into the street corners and the common folks of America. We're never wrong. We never made a mistake. And I can treat people how I want to because I'm just better than everybody else. We know that's not right. And yet, the behavior continues. Well, Christians, it's Lent. It's time to improve. It's time to grow. It's time to be better than what we were last year or the year before that. And if we're worried about why make such a sacrifice for the common good when nobody will understand or recognize or acknowledge, Peter goes back to Jesus Christ, who has gone to heaven and is at the right hand of God with angels, authorities, and powers, all made subject to him. The one who made the ultimate sacrifice is the one whose name is above all other names. It is the one who at his name every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess, because he suffered for the common good. How does your friends and acquaintances in life know that you're a Christian? Is it simply because you tell them you go to church? And that you tell them that you're a Christian? Or can you show them that you're a Christian? Do you show them that you are a Christian? Sometimes being a Christian means to suffer for the common good. And that is far better than suffering for doing evil. Because those who do evil in our world usually are suffering in prison. But we have a long history of those who walked before us who have suffered for the common good. Remember those guys who signed a document that pledged their honor, their wealth, and their lives for freedom and the common good? What about all those young men, and probably women too, some 170 years ago, who died for the freedom of the African Americans who lived in this country as slaves? Or those men who fought in the trenches of World War I when it was cold and snowy and there was all kinds of gases being thrown around. You want to suffer for that so that we can be free? Or you want to leave that to the next guy? Or how about the Meredith Frys of the world, who were drafted by the government in the 40s to go and fight off Nazism in the Imperial Japan relate to it when I'm working at the fire department. Those 360 odd whatever firemen and policemen who ran in to 2 burning towers 110 stories tall to get everyone else out, suffering for the common good. Run! Get away from these buildings! As they fall on them. Sometimes it's needed in life. And to me, that's what Christians do. Because it's not about how long we live in this world or how much, how many toys we have. It's how we help others. It's what Peter did. It's what Jesus did. It's what Paul did. It's what St. Augustine did. Thomas Aquinas. John Wesley. You could go on and on. You want to find the higher ground in life? Start sacrificing for the common good. And the Lord will lift you up. He will help you stand just as He did His Son. And ultimately plant Him on the highest ground. Promised us the same. We can but follow His will for our lives. As for me, I'm pressing on the upward way. New heights I'm seeking to gain every day. Still praying as I'm upward bound. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. I'm not going to get there living for myself. I'm only going to get there by living for all of God's creation. I hope you can do the same as disciples of Jesus Christ this Lenten season, so that when Easter does come, your feet will as well be on higher ground, and that people can see Christ in and through you.
I'm pressing on.